Perfect. So yeah, we will be recording, so this will go up on our YouTube channel. So you should just get a little box um, to let you know that it's now being recorded. So my name's Ellie. I'm hosting today for Caitlin. So I'm one of the highly specialist speech therapists at ATtherapy, and Caitlin's another one of our speech therapists too. So yeah, big thank you for joining us. Again, if you have any questions throughout, just type them in the chat box. So I will be monitoring that throughout, and we'll have some time at the end to go through those with Caitlin. Yeah, do you want to? You
All
ready
right.
to make a start? And I'll hand over to you.
Thanks, Ellie.
Okay.
Okay, hi everyone. My name's Caitlin. I'm one of the speech and language therapists at ATtherapy, as Ali said earlier. So I've been at ATtherapy just come up to 2 years now. I started in September, so yeah, almost at 2 years. And I've got quite a varied caseload really, but one thing most of my clients have in common is that they're mainly AAC users. So I get the privilege of working with them in schools, in colleges, and in their homes as well. So yeah, quite a lot of variety in my caseload, which is really nice. So as Ellie said, we're going to be talking all about access today and how that relates in terms of communication devices and communication. So we're going to be looking at what electronic AAC is and who uses it, why access is so important, and we'll then be looking at 6 key types of access in a little bit more detail as well. So AAC, some of you might already know what this acronym means, but we use it a lot in the field. So I just want to explain what this one means. So it's augmentative and alternative communication. And we usually put those words in that order. So augmentative first and alternative, just because augmentative means to assist or to support, and then alternative is to replace. So usually what we're doing with AAC is to aid and support someone's communication. It's only really quite specific situations where we might be thinking about someone's alternative communication. So for example, if they were biting or like pulling someone's hair as their form of communication, that's the kind of thing we'd be thinking about, maybe thinking of an alternative to that. So it's anything to support communication. And this quote here from Buchelman and Miranda, it says, AAC aims to enable individuals to participate functionally in interactions and activities by compensating for their impairments so they can habilitate individuals to develop communication for the first time. So we like to think of it as a spectrum rather than a hierarchy. So we've got it nice and visual for you here. So we've got paper-based on one side, battery operated in the middle, and then electronic on the other side. So you might also hear the terms low-tech AAC, mid-tech AAC, or high-tech AAC. I've highlighted paper-based, battery-operated, and electronic, just because that's kind of what the language we're using in the field at the moment, and that's to highlight that we're moving away from that low-tech to high-tech terms, because some people were viewing the high-tech AAC as kind of better than the low-tech AAC, and that's not really the case at all, because for some people a paper-based system is really what works, and an electronic system wouldn't be appropriate for them. So the kind of things we mean when we talk about paper-based are things like symbols, and these might be individual symbols, or they might be used on an e-tram frame. They might be within a communication book, such a pod book, or one that's bespoke with maybe some core words. We might be thinking about core boards as well within the classroom. Writing and drawing is another form of AAC. Of course, we've got signing as well, so things like Makaton or sign along. And thinking about using our symbols on now and next boards as well, or part of a PEX system as well. So for our battery operated, we've got like our voice output communication devices. So things like a Big Mac or a step-by-step or a Go Talk, those are all battery operated. And for electronic AAC, we've got essentially what that means is it's an electronic communication device controlled by a variety of different means. More on that in a second. So yes, that's what we're talking about today, this electronic side of AAC. So just thinking quickly about who uses electronic AAC. And really, I just want to get across to you today that it's a real big variety of people that use electronic AAC. The thing that they might all have in common is that they might be using the electronic AAC because some or all of the time they can't rely on their speech alone to communicate. So these pictures show a few different groups of people that we might have typically using electronic AAC. So we might have people with physical disabilities. So we've got a lot of clients at ATtherapy that have cerebral palsy, or they might have an acquired or birth injury, genetic syndromes, they might have had a stroke. We've also got people that have had a neurodegenerative condition. So the middle picture is of Stephen Hawking and his communication device there as well. And then we might have our autistic users that will be using AAC to communicate as well. So these users may or may not also have a complex communication need as well. So they may be nonverbal. We might be hearing the term hard to reach by other people. This might cover some of these types of clients, really. Okay, so before we get started on talking about access, I just want to bring up the means, reasons and opportunities model. I think it's really helpful to think about when we discuss AAC. So a lot on this slide, but if we just look in the middle here, functional communication is in the middle. So functional communication, that's communication that's meaningful for that person, useful, and it means something. And what this model suggests is that we need these three circles, the means, the reasons, and the opportunities, all of those three things to happen together for functional communication to occur. And each one of those, they're equally important, but we need all three of them to happen. So we need the means, which is the how to communicate. So we're talking today about electronic AAC, but we'll also mention a little bit about paper-based as well. But other means of communicating, we've got speech, we've got non-verbal communication, so facial expressions, gesture, body language, and then signing as well. And if we don't have the means, then we don't have any way to communicate. So the next one, we've got the reasons to communicate. And yeah, that's because we need a reason to communicate, really. So that's thinking about our communicative functions there. So whether that's communicating for a greeting or to gain attention, to request something, to comment on something, ask a question, answer a question, or say no, that's a really important communicative function as well. So if we don't have the reasons, there's no point in communicating. And then the last one that's important to consider is the opportunity. So we're thinking here about the when, the where, and the with whom. So the place of communicating, so is that in the community, is it at school, is it at home? The time, are we thinking about all the different times of communicating within lessons, outside of lessons, bath time, playtime, bedtime, and who we're communicating with. So there might be one key communicative partner, but we might have hopefully more than that. And we're thinking there about that whole context of who to communicate with. And if we don't have the opportunities, then there's no chance to communicate. So today we're talking about the means. So that's the how of communicating. Okay, so electronic devices and access. So what is an electronic device? It's essentially a modified computer, and that could be an adapted device. So it could be a phone or a tablet or an iPad that's adapted for communication in some way, or it could be like more of a bespoke communication device. So there's kind of three main big companies in the UK that make these bespoke devices. So we've got Liberator, Tobii Linebox, and Smartbox, but there are a whole host of other smaller companies as well that do some really great communication devices. So it's any of those hardware options, and then the access is how we're controlling it. So typically we've got direct access, so whether that's touch or using a stylus. It could be controlled using a keyboard, a mouse, or mice alternatives and joysticks, switches, Eyegaze, and voice. And then quite a lot of our users as well will use a combination of these or may change over time as well. So I want to be thinking about being quite flexible with access too. Okay, so the first one to talk about is direct access. And I think if the user is able to do this physically, it's often the preferred access method. It tends to be the quickest one. It's very socially acceptable, and we see that as quite an important factor for some of our like children as clients, and then also people that have had like an acquired brain injury. They want to, they're kind of considering what their peers are doing, and we're all using phones and tablets so much that direct access is very socially acceptable. There's a whole range of software and so on that has been adapted for direct access, probably the most accessible out of the different types I'm talking about today. But with the bespoke devices, they tend to be able to accommodate any different access methods. So we're not going to be talking about the software today, because that's a whole other webinar about what to consider and things like that. But just to say that for any of these access methods, that is something that you obviously will be needing to think about as well. So for example, with direct access, you might need to consider the cell size. So how many cells have you got on one screen? How able is that person to navigate around that device? You'd be thinking about the size of the device as well, the portability of it. I think there's so many things to consider, cost, all of these things. But yeah, that's another webinar for a future date. So thinking about direct access then, the touch accommodations is something that some of those like tablets and iPads and things will already have these settings in there. So we can make things easier for direct access use, which can be really good. So for example, things like on the iPad, you can set it so that it ignores light touches. So it's useful for someone that has maybe some unintentional movement or tremors potentially as well. So that it's just recognizing much more like a more intentional movement. And you can also set it so that you can set it up to have particular gestures or swipes that mean particular commands as well. So we tend to see some really good accessibility settings in the iPad. Android have them too. There's a little bit less there on the Android devices at the moment, but I'm sure it was going to come in the future. Key guards. So this picture up here, this is this clear Perspex device at the front of this device, sorry, is the key guard. And what that does is it just helps for anyone that finds it more difficult to isolate a finger. So if you're using maybe a knuckle or the palm of your hand instead of a finger, that can help make the activation exactly where you want it. So it is to a specific size depending on what software you've got. The styluses, we've got a big range of them down here, and you can really be quite inventive with these. I've seen some really nicely adapted ones. This one here you can see has got a good wrist support and some finger support there as well. This is more of like a pen style one, but some extra tripod support there. This requires a whole hand grasp. Somebody that hasn't got a tripod grip yet, that'd be really good. And this one, no need for hands at all. That's a mouth one there. So yeah, very inventive you can be. As long as you've got that tip there at the bottom, you can really use whatever you like. Okay, so keyboards next. Although direct access might be kind of the preferred access for a lot of users, sometimes physically keyboards are actually quite a bit easier. And what we tend to see is this is preferred usually for maybe older users and people that have had like an acquired injury. So we're thinking then again about whether they've got those literacy skills to be able to use a keyboard, and often if it's an acquired injury, then those literacy skills, they've already developed that. So these pictures here, this is the Allura and this one's a light writer. And they're both, you can see they've both got keyboards, a screen and some speakers. They tend to be really very robust devices, so quite unbreakable, tend to be, and they've got really good battery lives. And you can have all sorts of different keyboard settings as well. So you can have a QWERTY setup, you can have an ABC setup. If you're just using one hand, you can have them bent round so that they're just being able to use with one hand. All sorts of different bespoke options as well. This one here down in this picture here, you can see how big that one is. So they've really isolated those keys, and it kind of looks like they've almost got a key guard on top there as well, so it's a little bit easier. And just to say as well that even if you're not using like a kind of bespoke device like the Allura or the light writer, the Predictable app, which you might have like on an electronic device, and you might be using with a like a plug-in or a Bluetooth keyboard, you can also set up functions for different keys then as well, so you can make different keys have different functions, which is just a nice thing to know. So the Allura here, this is one from Jabla. So they're based in Belgium, and they've got some really great functionality there in to do with dual languages. So because they're based in Belgium, they've got a lot of bilingual speakers there. So that's a nice feature for the Allura as well. Okay, so mice and joysticks. Well, first, what's the difference? And really, it's as simple as with a mouse, your arm moves around to control the mouse. And with a joystick, your arm is stable and you just move the stick with the joystick. That's pretty much all the difference there is, although they do look a bit different, and there's lots of different varieties of these as well. This one here in the top right-hand corner, that's a mouth joystick. So you can get a lot of different ranges with these as well. I've got a video in a second of using the joystick, so I won't say too much more about that now. I'll just explain about the different head mice. So there's 3 different types in these pictures down here. So this one with can you see that small silver sensor? It's a kind of disposable silver sticker there. That's an optical head sensor. So the Headmouse Nano uses that technology. So it's like a disposable sensor that you put usually on your forehead, but it could be your nose, it could be your glasses, and that the Headmouse will pick up the reflection on that sensor, and it knows where you are then in space. This one here with the green around the eyebrows and the mouth, that one doesn't have any hardware involved, but this is a software-based system. So this is the Smile Mouse, and this is really clever. It uses facial gestures via a webcam, and you then make those facial gestures into the way that you control that device. So, for example, you might have like raising your eyebrows as to click to activate, or you might have a smile to click. You can change those, so it's up to you how you set that up. And then this last one, this is a sensor-based head mouse. So this is like a gyroscope one, and that just senses where you're moving, the relation from that to where the sensor is. So we've got some videos coming up next to explain that. I wanted you to be able to see these in use. So we have tested these videos, and it should be they should be working fine. It kind of depends on your bandwidth whether you'll be able to see them clearly enough. So if you are finding that you're having a problem with kind of a bit of lag with the videos, then you can either catch up by watching the recording later on YouTube. We'll send that out to you by email, or you can get in touch with us, and we've also got a playlist of just the specific videos, not inside of the presentation, which we can send you on YouTube as well. Okay, so joysticks first. So we have our communication device here. This is a grid pad. We're going to look now at some alternatives to different mice. So I'm sure we'd all be familiar with something like this, a wireless mouse. And of course, as an alternative to a mouse, there'd be the tracker pad on a laptop. These can be really difficult for somebody with limited mobility or physical limitations. So we'll have a look here at some different joysticks that can be in place of a mouse. So I've got this one here that I've wired into the communication device. Some of them are Bluetooth. This one is just a USB that I've put into the back. And you can see that we've got this nice soft squishy ball-like head on this one here. I've got some different heads here that we could use instead. This one fits nicely within the fingers. This is a smaller one. Someone maybe with a smaller hand, they might not need such a big one. This is a golf ball. Or this one, they've been very inventive here. This looks like the top of a skipping rope. So you can see how it would pop onto the top there, and you'd be able to use a full hand grasp with that. These softer textures might be good if you're not accessing the joystick with your hand. So maybe you're using a knee or a leg, and that might be easier with this kind of texture. So you'll notice that for this particular joystick, I've also wired a switch in, and that's just in place of pressing these to make the selection. So just like on a mouse here, we've got the buttons on this joystick. That's controlled with this red and yellow button here. Now that might be a difficult movement for somebody, so we've got the switch that can make that selection instead. So let's have a look at how it works in action. I'll move it like this so we can see. So you can see there it's quite a nice smooth movement. And to make a selection, I could either press the button here, or I might be able to press the switch.
Helps.
So of course you could change this to whatever type of switch is right for that user. We can talk about switches a bit more in a minute. Okay, so that's joysticks there. So we have our communication. Next, I'll just show you how the Headmouse Nano works. You can see, you won't be able to see me and the Headmouse at the same time because I'm filming at the same time, but I've put it on my finger so that you can see. So instead of it being on my head or glasses, I've got it on my finger instead, just so you can see. So I've connected the Headmouse, which is the black box on top of the communication device. You can see there's a red light in the right hand corner there, which means it's not picking anything up, and that's because we haven't put one of its reflective stickers onto anything yet. So usually that might go in the middle of someone's forehead, or it might go on somebody's glasses in the bridge of the nose, bridge of the nose section right in the middle. I can't put them on my glasses at the moment because these are metal frames and it still picks up some of that reflectiveness sometimes with metal things. So that's a bit of a note if you've got any metal in your glasses frames. So what we're going to do instead is I've just popped the sticker, the end of my finger there. That's the reflective side. I'm going to turn it around and you'll see that now that green light's gone on, and I'm not touching the device. I'm a few, probably about 30 centimeters away, but it's now picking that up. So let's jump home, and I'll just explain that I've popped it on dwell to activate, which is why you can see that spinning circle coming up on the cell, and we've set it to about 1 second. So let's try and say something now.
I want more.
So there you go, that's the Headmouse. Okay, so hopefully that's given you a nice example of how those are used with a communication device. Okay, so on to switches now. So you might have seen switches in schools, or if you're supporting someone, they might have a switch to control some toys or environmental controls and things. But really, we tend to use switches because they can be easier to control because they've got a nice big target area typically, than like a keyboard might have, or direct access via a touch screen. So you'll see them with use in toys. These can be specific switch toys, or we can adapt those as well for controlling the environment, so turning the TV on or changing the curtains, blinds, and then of course with communication devices as well. And there's really such a variety of switches out there. You can probably get one exactly what you're looking for. They mostly are activated by touch, but some of them are movement, let's say like proximity switches, or sound activated as well. So the next two videos, the first one shows you some of these switches just in use. I've used a light instead of a communication device, just so you can see the switch being used to turn the light on and off. And then the next video will show you how we use a switch with a communication device, so using switch scanning. So before we think about how switches can be used with a communication device, let's just take a look at the wide variety of switches first. So we've got loads of different ones here. You typically might see smoothie switches in school. These are actually wireless and Bluetooth ones here, so they don't have wires at the back. Most of these are wired options. But when you're looking at switches, it's obviously really important to think about where it's going to be placed near someone's body, if that's going to be accessed by their hands, by their feet. This is a pillow switch. This is, as the name suggests, often used for head activations. It's got this nice soft texture. Sometimes it has a cover on it as well. Let's take a look using this red light just to see how some of these work. I've plugged this little mini button one in here. This could be placed near someone's knee, anywhere really. It could be mounted onto someone's chair. Some of the more unusual switches we've got here, we've got the PAL pad here. Let me just plug this one in. So the PAL pad, if you look at the light, just requires me to touch anywhere on this sensor. So really, really nice for someone that doesn't have too much kind of power behind a touch, really. This one here is the micro light. So you can see it pretty small here, and all it requires, and it might be placed in someone's hand like this. Again, this could be mounted somewhere next to their head, perhaps. We've got the wobble switch here. So this looks much like a joystick, and it can be activated in any direction. So nice for someone that's got quite big movements, maybe. That one. And this one is the candy corn switch. So this is a proximity switch, which means there's actually no touch needed for it. I just need to go near it. So maybe good for someone that might wave their hands near it to activate something. There is also a muscle switch, which I don't have here, but you could put that around someone's arm, and it has a sensor on it which, when you flex the muscle, it would make that activation. So we've tried it in the office with moving your eyebrows, moving your arms, all sorts.
Okay, so that's the range of different switches. And then how I would use that in a communication
So before we think
device would be as part of switch scanning.
So when you use a switch with a communication device, you'll be using this in the method of switch scanning. A lot of communication devices have got 2 switch ports. I've just plugged one switch in just for now to show you this. But if you had both switches plugged in, you might use one switch to do the scanning and the second switch to do the selecting. In the method of single switch scanning, the single switch does all of those things, and you just follow the sequence to make that work. So how I've set it up here is to scan the rows and then the columns. So if you see, if I press the switch once, it will start highlighting down, and once I've found the word that I want, it starts to go across.
Like.
And you just start it all over again for the next word.
Going.
Okay, so that's switches and how they'd be used with communication devices. So next up is Eyegaze. And a lot of our clients at ATtherapy use Eyegaze. Actually, it's quite a popular access method for people with very significant motor disabilities. So yeah, it's really quite amazing when you first see this for the first time. It seems quite a bit like magic, but with Eyegaze, the eyes become the mouse. So anything you do with the mouse, you then use your eyes instead. So there's a few different ways you can set this up, but typically we'd use like a dwell to click setting, which is that circle bar that you saw earlier in one of those videos, but you can also do a blink to click as well. So dwell just means you need to hold your gaze on that same spot until you activate it, or a blink is obviously blinking the eyes together. There's other functions you can do like dragging and zooming and things like that, but typically just clicking or replacing a click with the eyes, with the eye gaze. And just important to say that because Eyegaze can be quite a tiring access method, when we might need to do kind of small chunks of it, especially at the beginning to get once we're getting practice with it, it's really good to keep going with like paper-based systems as well, to keep practicing those skills. So eye pointing across an e-tram frame to select symbols and things, those are really great to keep doing. And you might always use those to supplement like an electronic device as well. Okay, so a bit about the science, how it works. I'll do my best to explain this. The eye tracker, so within the eye tracker, there is near infrared light that comes out, and this light is reflected on the cornea, which is the front, like clear part of the eye, and that is typically quite a steady reflection because that just stays where it is. What it then does is it also reflects back against your pupil, and because your pupil is the thing that's moving around, it calculates the difference between the steady reflection and where your pupil is. So the cameras and the sensors and everything, they all work together to do that calculation, and it works out where your eye is looking, and therefore will move the mouse on the device to make it work. Okay, so another video for you here to see how it works now.
So I'm going to show you the Eyegaze now. The Eyegaze camera is this bar at the bottom. We've got the infrared sensors just blinked on here in the corners, and my head is coming up in this positioning guide here. So it's green, red because I'm moving my head around, shaking it around a bit so you can see. If I covered it up with one hand, I could cover one eye like that. You can see my left eye blinking on and off there. And you can actually set the camera just to pick up one eye. So if you've got a user that has maybe a divergent squint, then that can be really useful to track just one eye instead of both. But for kind of optimal eye gaze use, we'd calibrate using both eyes. So I've calibrated already, so I'm going to close the settings box down and you can see how it will work when I'm selecting a word to say. I've set it for dwell to activate, which is the usual eye gaze setting, and I've put it at a speed of about 1.2 seconds, which is in the range of kind of intentional activation. So let's have a go.
Stop. Now.
So there you go. You can see that's quite
More.
fast.
Go. Good.
But we could slow that down if someone needed a little bit longer to look around. And another one there is the rest cell, which gives me a little bit of time to look around there. So as soon as you put it on rest, you can't see my head moving, but I am looking all around the screen now. If I come off rest, I'm then able to reactivate any cell
C.
that I want.
Okay, so hopefully that gives you a little snapshot of how the Eyegaze works. There are a few things to consider when kind of making the Eyegaze access work. It is often described as a bit of a dark art to get it to work correctly. So I've split this up into environmental factors to consider and then human factors to consider. So first of all, the first thing we might check is the positioning. So we want the device obviously to be able to see the eyes, and that should be parallel to the user's face. We say about the distance of an adult's arm away. If we have mounted that, so it might be mounted on a mounting arm to somebody's wheelchair, that positioning part can, the time that takes to set that up right can really drastically reduce. So that's quite a good reason that we might mount something to speed that up. Light sources, so that can really play a bit of havoc with the infrared beam. So we're thinking about reflections from windows, but also what we're really interested in is whether that infrared beam is being disrupted in any way. So often actually it's kind of overhead lighting that will disrupt that beam. So you can just play around with where you are in the room, which direction you're looking at, and so on. Activity. So this is one for the communication partner to be aware of. Is the task unfamiliar? Is it new to them? Are the targets too small? They're finding that a bit too difficult. Maybe your activity is actually just a bit boring. They're just not interested. Or maybe we need to think about what prompting we can do to make that a bit more supported for them. So maybe they might need a bit more modelling, or they might need more of a direct prompt. Next one is about glasses. So there's a bit of conflicting information in the literature about this really. So it kind of is a bit of a try and see really with this one, but the prescription can make a difference. So things like if you've got astigmatism like I do, because that's changing like the way that the beam is coming through, that can affect things more than if it's just nearsighted or long-sighted. But it can really just depend. Sometimes it doesn't make too much difference. And then thinking about whether the glasses have also got like a reflective coating on them as well, because that affects how the sense is being picked up as well. The last thing we might consider in the environmental factors is about calibrating. It's not necessary to calibrate, but it does help for those smaller targets or if things are in the corner. Some of my clients love calibrating and they kind of see it as a bit of a game. So they're well up for it and it's really easy for them. But I've got another client that he just turns his head away. He's not interested at all. So I mean, we don't need to calibrate, but it does make it a little bit easier. And then things about the user that you need to consider in terms of Eyegaze as well. So how motivated they are to use it. Are they potentially just a bit tired? Maybe they've been looking at the screen for 45 minutes already. They might be a bit fed up. We need to consider the language of the software and whether that matches the language of the user. I think that one kind of seems a bit obvious, but there are different software packages in different languages and things as well. We also need to think about the visual, the vision of the user as well. So a lot of my clients with cerebral palsy also have a diagnosis of cortical visual impairment, which means there's nothing kind of structurally wrong with the eye, but it's to do with the processing between the eye and the brain. So it can fluctuate day to day, and they use Eyegaze really successfully, even though they do have CVI, but it's just something to bear in mind that can affect and can fluctuate as well. eyes. Again, this seems obvious, but are the eyes even open, or are they fully open? Do they have long eyelashes? I had a client with beautiful long eyelashes, and they did just dangle in front of the eyes a little bit. So we had to think about the positioning there, whether we wanted it to be kind of open his eyes a little bit naturally by placing the device a bit further up. And then if someone's got nystagmus, which is like a shaking eye or poor head control, then that's something else to consider, as that does make eye gaze a little bit more difficult. Okay, so just using eye gaze with CVI a bit more on this. Something that's really important to consider is how visually cluttered things are, because that just increases the amount that they've got to do in terms of visual processing. So you can see this first picture here, this lady, she's got a nice patterned top on, she's got some earrings, she's in front of quite a busy background, and there's a bit of glare on those symbols as well. Whereas here, she's got a plain coloured top, no earrings, everything's a bit more simple. So even though the actual symbols there are the same, this one is much easier to process visually. So we want to be thinking about that when we're thinking about the software for someone with CVI. And we also need to consider the motor planning as well. So, I mean, motor planning is important for any AAC user, but particularly for someone with CVI, because they're relying on that motor planning pathway and forming those motor plans as part of their learning and learning to navigate around the device. So we want to be keeping the icons and the language in the same place where we can, except for if we want to be kind of testing like a yes or no response, we might be swapping those around. And then the rest cell can be a really good thing to teach someone how to use if they've got CVI, because it just gives them a bit more extra time, a bit more time to process, look around, have a break, and then come back to it. Okay, so the last kind of access method we're going to be talking about today is voice. And this is a really exciting, kind of more like a newer area access method wise, in terms of the software that's being developed. And so what we're thinking about here in terms of voice is non-standard speech, so speech that might be dysarthric, which means slow or slurred speech. So what this software will do is it will kind of translate the non-standard speech into a synthesized voice. And it typically is using kind of AI models and things like that to do that. So there's two ways that this software will work. It will do it either as pre-recorded speech. So you might have key phrases that you say, so people's names, places, or things like one bus ticket to town, please, or Alexa, turn the TV on, if you're thinking about environmental controls. Or it can also do kind of spontaneous non-standard speech as well. So that means non-standard speech to synthesized speech, or non-standard speech to text as well. And the two softwares I've put on this slide, we've got the Google Project Relate. So that's an Android-based system. That's they're both in beta mode actually. So it's still kind of testing them out. And then the VoiceIt software is like an Apple-based one as well. Okay, so we've thought about access now, and just the last kind of information slide before we wrap things up. I just wanted to think about this in the bigger picture, really. So I hope I've persuaded you that access is really important to consider when thinking about a communication device. But I also wanted to say that it's not the only thing to consider. So you can see here, this is the iAsk explanatory model of AAC decision making, which is part of the a big project that Manchester Metropolitan University did. So there's much more information about that on their website, and they've got some nice resources that explain this model in a bit more detail. But you can see here, access, what we talked about today, that's just one of these key cogs in this whole diagram. So what we'll also need to be considering are things about the user. So things about, it says child, but obviously that can be an adult as well. Things about the device, you know, portability, size, whether it has the right access requirements for that person. And then all of that needs to be considered in terms of this funnel as well. So we're thinking about, are there any key transitions coming up between settings? Are they moving? Are they going to college? Are they, you know, going to school? Available resources, really important. So who's going to be supporting that person in terms of being the communication partner, but also who's going to be doing the training and the programming and that kind of thing. And then also we need to be thinking about the ways in which we're working as well. So is that like a direct way of working? Is it consultative? All of those things, they all form part of that clinical decision. And that really should be a very holistic decision in consultation with a lot of different people. Obviously, the most important person is the user. So if we can get their opinion and their voice, that's the most important one. At the end of the day, they're the one using it. So if they're not happy with the device or the access method, there's no chance they're going to be using it. You want to get that one sorted out first, that their opinion heard. Need to be thinking about the family as well, and then the education team and therapeutic professionals, so speech and language therapists. You might also have assistive technologist, an occupational therapist, maybe a visual impairment teacher as well. Lots of people that might need to have a professional opinion on it as well. And just to finish off by saying that the access method that the person uses today may well change in the future. So that might affect the decision about the device as well. So you might be thinking, okay, well, let's get a really robust device that's able to accommodate those changes, that can have different access methods. Or maybe the opposite, you might be thinking, okay, well, we're not sure, what works now. Let's get maybe an iPad to start with, and we'll try some things out on a more cost-effective device first. So yeah, lots of things to think about when it comes to communication devices. A few different further support things to mention there before we just summarize what we've covered today. So we've discussed electronic AAC and what that is. We now know that it's an electronic communication device. People that use it have a range of physical, developmental, or neurological conditions that affect their ability to use speech to communicate. Access is the how we communicate. So that coming back to the means, reasons, and opportunities model, and it is important to get right. There's lots of different types of access methods, and we've looked at direct access, keyboards, mouse alternatives and joysticks, switches, Eyegaze, and voice. And choosing the right access method is an important part of choosing the right device, but remember, it can change, so it's important to stay flexible. Okay, so I'm going to pass you back over to Ellie now.
Yeah, thank you so much for that, Caitlin. It was really, really interesting, and I think really well explained and clearly as well, all the different access methods and everything that we need to think about, which is a lot. I can't see any questions at the minute in the chat, so if anyone does have any questions, now's the time to just pop those in the chat. I don't know if any have been sent directly to you, Caitlin. I know sometimes that happens.
I can't see actually whilst I'm still sharing this.
Okay.
So if someone has a question, maybe they could unmute themselves and ask me directly.
while we're just seeing if anyone does have a question, I just had one around, you touched on the MDT working. I guess I'm just wondering how you work with the MDT when assessing positioning, because it is so important.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I tend to work with assistive technologists and occupational therapists probably in terms of positioning, because they tend to have OTs will have assessed like different functions, and they'll have a good sense of whether it's going to be an upper limb or lower limb. Yeah, they've been absolutely great to work with. I've always really enjoyed my joint sessions with OTs.
Yeah. We've had a few comments in the chat box. So Andrew said, no questions from me, very informative and clear. And just thank you so much for sharing and for your time. And then Nikki's said that it was such a great presentation, Caitlin. You explained the topic so clearly, and your videos made understanding access really accessible. Thank you. Oh, we do have a question from Annette. So, is there a formal AAC assessment tool which you use as part of your practice?
Oh, very good question. So that I-ask model there that I covered in that last slide, I have used that to kind of inform my practice, just because it really makes me think about all of the different things to consider. It tends to be, I mean, I think that's a really good way of structuring your thinking about it, but it is quite a kind of a dynamic decision. And I think, yeah, there's a lot, I mean, people have different preferences and how they do that, but it can tend to be like more of a informal dynamic decision as well, without kind of a more formal structure.
Sorry, I'm just trying to get the link for you now for that to pop in the chat. Somebody else has said, so Joanne said it's really helpful. We'll share with new support worker who is working with one of my clients who has Eyegaze when I get the link for replay.
Thank you.
So what we could do in the email is send information around the I-ask model that we use. So some further resources. So we do have our AT training videos available on our YouTube channel. We do have some Instagram pages as well that we try and post on regularly, and our ATtherapy Facebook account too. We do have upcoming events from our training team. So we've got our Makaton training, levels 1 to 4, Talking Mats, the Brick program, and AAC building blocks. So if you follow us on Eventbrite, you should be able to find all of our courses that we currently offer. And then in terms of future webinars, we have a summer podcast coming up, so a summer special. So keep an eye on your inboxes, because we will be sending out information about that very soon, with more details about what that's going to look like. And again, just thank you so much for spending what I assume is your lunch break with us. Really glad to have you here. And again, thank you so much, Caitlin.
I'm going to stop the recording now.